Welcome to the show. My guest today is Michael Landsberg. He is a Canadian broadcaster and mental health advocate. He is also my mentor. And I can say that because even though Michael and I have met just once before, and he might not even remember it, what I learned from Jonathan Hood in our episode about why mentors matter is that someone can be your mentor from far away. Michael Landsberg is a mentor to me and to countless others every day through his daily Landsblog video series, 364 days a year, and his more recent Isolation Nation community, all of which can be found on SickNotWeak.com. Michael, if someone hasn't seen you in a while and they run into you and they say, "Hey, Michael, what have you been up to these days?" How do you typically answer that question?
You know, that's a great question. And you're running a risk here, by the way, John. And that is that you run the risk when you meet your mentor. Sometimes you go, "Oh God, that was the worst thing," because that was crushing. So now I'm my goal for the next half hour or so is to make sure that I don't let you down in that department. Thanks for that. It's weird because I worked in television all my life, and anybody who was a sports fan probably turned on the show that I hosted or turned off the show that I hosted. See, if I said, "Oh, everybody turned on the show," that would be arrogance. But I'm acknowledging the fact that many turned it on and then turned it off because they didn't like it. And I'm okay with that. And I think that you mentioned my mental health advocacy. I think one of the reasons why it's so easy for me to get in front of the camera and talk about my battle with mental illness is that I developed a thickness of skin, which allowed me to be myself on the air and to know that the swagger that I had would be misperceived and people would see it as arrogance and not just sort of a fun, cocky swagger. And I think that really set me up for being able to get in front of the camera or get in front of a live audience in the old days when we used to go in front of live audiences and say, "Hey, my name is Michael Landsberg. I battled an illness called depression. I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed, and I'm not weak." And I think because I can do that, first of all, there's a lot of people who know what I'm doing, but far more who don't know what I'm doing. I mean, let's face it, SickNotWeak and the daily Landsblog that you mentioned, and Isolation Nation and all the things I do are like this big. The one thing I do that's way bigger is, of course, Bell Let's Talk Day, which, who doesn't know Bell Let's Talk Day? So, I'm doing what I want to do right now with my life, which is I'm still broadcasting. I'm still getting to talk about sports, but I get to talk about mental health and I get to put a purpose to my pain, and I get to use the worst thing in my life as one of the best things in my life. And I get to talk to people like you answering questions as opposed to asking questions.
Well, so far, I'm not disappointed.
Give me time. I got some plans to let you down, man. Woo!
Bell Let's Talk. Is terrific, but I'm sure you've heard the comment before. It's one important day of the year. The remainder of the year, I really encourage everyone to visit on a daily basis, as I try to do, SickNotWeak.com. And I know that I've heard you explain it. I've heard you explain Sick Not Weak. What does it mean? And you can sort of intuit from those three words what it means. But I thought I'd ask you in a different way, maybe in one that you haven't been asked before, is can you unpack Sick Not Weak in this way? What, in terms of the difference between being sick and weak versus sick not weak?
Well, I think it really all comes from something that obviously I had nothing to do with, which is the stigma that surrounds mental illness, which has been around for, I don't think we talked about it 100 years ago, right. But it's been around, for as long as there has been people who had mental illness and people who looked at them and thought, "God, what is wrong with that person?" I think that at the heart of the stigma is the idea that mental health somehow is a self-inflicted wound, that it's different than other physical illnesses. And even the term mental illness, I have no idea what that actually means. If you think about it, Parkinson's is a brain disease. Depression is a mental illness. Why is depression different than Parkinson's? I mean, I spend all my time trying to convince people that, and I know the answer to that. The answer to that is you can see Parkinson's, right? People get shakes, people slur their words. People, you could do a brain scan of someone with Parkinson's and you could see it. But there's no way that from the outside you can see the manifestation of my mental illness, my depression. And there's no test that I can show you that's going to prove it. So there's always this feeling like, is it real? Like for it to be real, I want to see, a lump on the side of your head, Michael. I want to see a shake in your hand. I want to see a blood test that shows levels out of whack. And because that doesn't exist, there is this perception that it's self-inflicted, that it's brought on, and that somehow it's a weakness. And that's why I spend all my time basically saying these three words. I guess I'm going to add a few to them, but I am sick, not weak. And even that is controversial because people will say, well, why do you want to be known as sick? Well, it's like, well, no, I don't want to be known as sick. I don't want to be sick, but I'd rather be known as sick with a sickness than sick with a weakness. And it's possible to be both, right? I mean, you can be in general a weak person and have a mental illness, right? But I find that the strongest people in a room are often the people who have mental illness and who are willing to A, battle it, B, get out of bed and battle it, and C, tell the people around them, hey, I have this illness. I'm not ashamed or embarrassed, and I'm sure as hell not weak.
When I go on your YouTube channel, I am stunned by the commitment, daily updates on how you're doing, what you're doing, how you're feeling. And I genuinely think it's amazing. How do you stay committed? Have you always been disciplined? Most people start something. I mean, this has been 4 or 5 years now. Do you know how many videos you have? You have over 1,800 videos, wow. Michael. How do you stay this consistent?
Okay, well, I just realized when you were saying that, I think I'm going to start to mail it in. I've done enough. Like, wow, it wasn't until you mentioned that number. It's like, I'm taking today off. First of all, you said something, are you generally someone who, is wired for that kind of commitment? And the answer in almost every other aspect of my life has been no. Although I am good with commitment. I've been married to the same woman for most of my life. So I think that is a statement of some kind, which may or may not relate to mental health, but it relates to the fact that, sometimes you make a vow and it's important to keep it. And even if it's not easy, I mean, that's marriage, but that's also doing a daily blog. But I have, over the course of my life, quit a million different things. But broadcasting was something that I never, ever looked for the easy way. And mental health, I never did, because I think part of it is ego, from the standpoint that I feel good about myself when I do a daily blog. I feel good about myself when I practice my craft, which is broadcasting. These are things that give me self-esteem boost. So there is a selfish side to every person that does something for charity. And at the very least, that selfish side is we feel good about ourselves. So there is something in it for us. But I think for me, it's. I mean, some of this is going to sound kind of hokey, and I'm not sure that it's all I believe it all. But this is kind of my way of paying back the illness, right? Like depression has taken a lot from me, and has ruined aspects of my life and times in my life. So it's like, this is my way of paying it back, which again is a little bit hokey because this illness does not exist as an entity. It's not like, I'm getting revenge and in depression is cursing me out going, damn you, Landsberg. So there is a part of me, though, that feels as though I get to, in my own mind, rationalize the presence of this illness and the presence of the dog in my house, who brings me joy. Hey, Riggs, hold on one sec, bud. I would apologize, but to be fair, there is someone that came to the door to drop off a parcel. And it is every dog's responsibility to bark at that. So I would be let down if he did not. So I get to bring back the illness, as I say, but also I get to put a purpose to my pain, and I get to feel a sense of usefulness in an area that what else could I do? Yeah. I'm a huge believer that when it comes to doing right by the rest of mankind. Hey, one sec. Hey, Riggs, come here, bud. Yeah. Good.
Viewers of the Daily Landsblog will know Riggs.
He's got to make an appearance on camera. Otherwise you go, well,
That's
I want
right.
to see the dog. Dogs are great, by the way, for anyone, but people that have mental health challenges, absolutely.
Yeah.
So to wrap up this quite lengthy answer with some interruptions, I would say that I do it every day because I can, because it's a celebration of success for me, which is not having beaten the illness, but having found a way to live with the illness. And because of that, I get to celebrate it by looking into the camera and saying, hey, Daily Landsblog, Michael Landsberg here. And I know that that will make a difference to someone else's life. So there you go.
Well, that's where I wanted to jump into. When you look into the camera, besides or in addition to your daughter, Casey, who is your videographer, director, producer, and interviewer, who else are you really talking to?
That is a very good question that people will answer that question, whether you're speaking to, the host of a TV show or somebody who does, musician who does live concerts. That's always the question. Who are you talking to? Because talking to the masses is a bad answer and a bad way to look at it. So I look at it this way, is that I'm talking to one person and I'm connecting with that one person because I know I can connect with that one person. And I know I can make a difference in that one person's life. And I know that if I can make a difference in that one person's life, that my day's been a wild success, and that somehow this illness, which I didn't get through any fault of my own, not through a weakness, this thing just hit me and it crippled me and it's taken a lot from my life. But because I can make a difference in one person's life, I can say, you know what, it's actually been worth it. To know that there's somebody alive today because you spoke into something that's so easy for me. I mean, here's the thing. This is so easy for me. It doesn't take any courage. It doesn't take any bravery. And it doesn't even take any real focus, because talking is all I've done in my life. So this is like the most natural thing in the world. So I'm talking to one person. That one person could be somebody who is battling an illness who goes, oh my God, he understands me. This is so powerful. No one understands me. No one's ever told me how they feel. And I've said, I feel the same way. But more than that, that whole group of people who care about someone who battles a mental illness, who've never experienced it, I get to touch them and to teach them how to be a better caregiver and how to look at that person in a new, different, more productive way.
Michael, do you know how many tweets you've sent out? Almost 20,000. Combine that with 1,800 or more video blogs, daily Lands blogs. You recently did one of your Lands blogs about the benefits of social media to folks who are struggling with anxiety or mental illness. I thought I'd ask you this way. What would you be doing if there wasn't social media? How would you be coping?
What would you be doing if you didn't have a telephone? I mean, you have no way to answer that, right? Because you've lived your whole life with a telephone. And while I have not lived my whole life with social media, my dog is now welcoming my wife back to our house. While I have not lived my whole life without social media or with social media, my entire time as a mental health advocate doing what I'm doing, social media has existed. And especially in the last 10 years, which kind of been, those would actually be the only years, because I didn't start talking about this until 2009 at the end of the year. So social media has been there, and Twitter has basically always been there. And so from that standpoint, I don't know if this part of me would even exist without social media, because how do you get your message out? There's no point in being a mental health advocate if you can't get your message out. You can't talk to just the people around you. Now, I, obviously have had the chance to broadcast to audiences, but you can't dominate the broadcast with something like mental health talk, because I'm not hired to talk about mental health. So I might very well not be having this conversation with you today. And, it's kind of not fun, but I think it's really relevant to say, okay, well, if I hadn't done any of this, how would my life be different? And how would other people's lives be different?
So I guess what I'm hearing there especially is that for people who have a mental illness. And you know what? Can I just stop and just acknowledge something? I have trouble. I'm one of those people that have trouble. I feel like I need to watch my words. You can probably hear me saying, people who sort of have a mental illness or, struggling with depression or anxiety. There is really this feeling of walking on eggshells when you're talking with someone who has that. And I think a better way to shift this is how do we, and I know you don't speak for everyone, but what are some tips for really trying to have a conversation with someone who might be struggling without feeling so self-conscious about every word that you're using?
Right. That's a great question. And I have a great answer for this. Oh my gosh, you're going to go, yeah, you know what? It was pretty good. First of all, it depends who you're talking to. For me, there's really nothing that you could say that would offend me. But given the fact that you're broadcasting to others, you could potentially offend them. Like I don't care. I believe that there are some words that are damaging for other people. Obviously not for me, because I don't care how people see me. But for the greater good, yeah, you're right to be sensitive about it. In a conversation with people, whether it's personal or whether it's in the case of a podcast like this, I think it's a really good thing to ask off camera or on camera to start with, which is to say, I'm an outsider looking in. And the answer that I was so proud of was going to be a question for you. And I hesitate to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. What is your background? What is your heritage? I look at you and you don't look exactly the same as me. Why is that?
Well, I'm Italian and Filipino. Italopino. My mom's from the Philippines. My dad's from Italy. And I do ask people, what do you think I am? And they guess everything other than Italian and Filipino. So I'm learning Spanish just because everyone thinks I'm Spanish.
So I guess my point is that you weren't offended by that question, right?
No.
And my point is that if you ask a question of somebody and you clearly ask it with the right intent, like if you say to somebody, else with a mental health challenge, hey, are you a whack job or what? Or, hey, do you think you're a loser? I mean, that obviously would be offensive to some. Not to me, because I would take that as a challenge. But I asked you this question genuinely, and I don't know, is it appropriate for me to ask this question? If so, if not, then I'm sorry. And if so, tell me what the answer is and how I should approach it. So I think it's kind of the same thing. Okay. Like if I'm interviewing a Black person about police racism, there's at some point has to be an acknowledgement that I don't understand what it's like to be driving at night and be pulled over by two white cops as a Black person. How could I propose to even imagine what that feels like? So I have to ask questions, I believe, that show off my ignorance when it comes to that. And if this person that I was interviewing about that was offended by one of the ways that I asked the question, then I would say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, obviously. I asked that out of ignorance. And that's why I think that it's a really good thing when you're doing an interview with someone about a topic that you can't possibly understand firsthand, first person, how it feels. Then it's a really good thing to say, hey, I don't know, what are the how am I supposed to talk about this?
Right. Thank you for that advice. I guess related to that too is the words that people use every day. I feel like I think I heard you correctly in the past when you said, and it's resonated with me for years, it was, don't say you're depressed if you're not depressed. That reduces the value of or the meaning behind someone who's really depressed. Are there other terms that, in a perfect world, not to police everybody, but we just watch the terms that we throw around because there are real people who are, in this case, really suffering from depression?
Yeah, it's like whoever invented English kind of ran out of words, right? Because we use the term depressed to describe, I'm a Sens fan. I'm not a Sens fan. I'm a Leafs fan. So I'm now putting myself in somebody else's position. But, I'm really depressed at how the season's worked out, or, oh my gosh, look at the weather outside. It's so depressing. It's fine to say that. But the challenge becomes there's another word that it means something totally different. But the ignorance that leads you to saying that is, first of all, is nothing to criticize someone for. Like I was the same way. Before I got hit by depression 20 years ago, I never measured, should I be saying this? Should I be saying it this way? I just thought that there was one kind of depression, which was I'm kind of down. And whether that was by your hockey team or about your hockey team or about the weather or about how you felt mentally. Mm-hmm. The key here is not use the words depression or anxious, anxiety, because those are multi-purpose words. The key is not to necessarily be aware that, well, I got to be careful when I say I'm anxious about someone. The key is to understand that those are dual meaning words and to understand the difference between everyday natural depression, everyday natural anxiety. Like, who's going to live their life without anxiety? Who's going to go through a pandemic who have the threat of losing their job, even if you haven't lost your job, the threat of this illness for you and for the people you care about? So if you said, I'm, kind of depressed about it, that's perfectly natural. But the key is to understand the difference between saying I'm depressed about this pandemic and understanding that that's not the same as saying I have an illness called depression. And that illness called depression does not come and go. It's not based on the circumstances around my life. It is a real life physical change to my brain that I cannot help, that I did not choose, that I cannot force out of my head. And if you understand that, then who cares how you refer to it? But here I have this thing, and I got to explain it to you. I like just to say it and then have the person who I'm saying it to go, what does that mean? I call it healthy brain-itis.
Okay.
Now you might say, well, healthy brain, itis means an illness. Like, how do you have a healthy brain-itis? And the answer is that as a healthy brain, we are prevented from understanding mental illness because of this thing, healthy brain-itis. Part of it is the arrogance of the healthy brain. There's 4 things about this that I think are really important lessons. Number 1, the healthy brain thinks they understand mental illness. Number 2, the healthy brain thinks they understand how to help someone with mental illness. Number 3, they think they understand how mental illness feels. And number 4, they feel like they have actually experienced it, but they overcame it because they are strong. People who've never been through depression think they've gone through it, right? Oh, wow. I heard Landsberg talking on John's podcast, and, he's talking about his illness and how he was battling it and how there were times he couldn't get out of bed or didn't want to get out of bed and he needed to go to a doctor and get on medication. Oh, wow, he's weak and I'm strong, because I had times in my life when I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't like my job or my school or my surroundings, but I didn't go, oh, boo-hoo, I have an illness. I'm strong and he's weak. And I think that's where the barrier exists, is understanding that you can't understand is the biggest thing. And the biggest thing that prevents a husband from being the best possible caregiver for his wife, or obviously vice versa. Or his husband or his son or daughter or brother or sister. You need to understand that you can't understand.
And I think to sum that up, it's something I heard you say recently, is comfort comes not from the number of people around you, but the number of people who understand you. You mentioned COVID-19, and just in sort of kind of wrapping up, you mentioned recently on one of your daily Landsblogs, a news article about the pandemic as a magnifier of mental illness. And during COVID, with record high levels of stress and anxiety, as self-reported by people completing surveys, how do you know you have depression? Is this something you Google?
See, you have a difficult interviewing style, and this is a compliment, just so you know, is that most people don't pause when they ask a question because they're not really thinking about the question. They're kind of just, they had it written down in front of them, but you said, how do you know if you are suffering from a mental illness? Do you Google it? I like that. I'm just paying you a compliment.
Well, thank you.
I think that the answer to that is See, my best answer to that is like, call me on the phone and I'll tell you. But that's obviously not practical. And I'm not the only one who knows this. But I know it from the inside out, as opposed to a doctor knows it from the outside in. You know, a doctor can tell you. I used this yesterday. I gave a speech to the Cleveland Clinic. Cleveland Clinic is a medical institution in Toronto, and their senior staff I was talking to. And, you know, I was saying how doctors can teach you all kinds of things about your illness. But if a doctor is asked, what are the symptoms of depression? That doctor will answer differently than I would answer. And it's because I know what it feels like. Symptoms and what they feel like sometimes are subtly different. How do you know if you're depressed? Here's how you know if you're depressed. Can you be pulled out of it, meaning I'm down because I lost my job, or I'm down because I'm worried about my job, or I'm worried about my dad, or I'm worried about all of these things, and I'm down, and I feel like I don't have any fun anymore in my life because I can't go out, because the things that I want to do I can't do. And then, you know, I'm the voice in your ear now that says, okay, if you could do one of those things, if you could go to the movie that you can't see now, or go to the restaurant, or go to the sports event, or if you could do something that you are missing, would that bring you joy? And if the answer is yes, oh, sure. Yeah. You know, if I could go to a movie, or if I could, you know, if I found out that my dad was, you know, didn't have COVID, my dad doesn't have COVID, but those kinds of things. If you remove the things that cause you pain, are you still in pain? And to me, that is like the ultimate marker for depression, because if you are truly depressed, then it's the loss of the ability to experience joy. So it's not that, you know, you're in a pandemic. If you can't do the things that you want to do and all of the things I just described, that would mean that every person is depressed with the illness. And that's not the way it is. You can be down about your circumstances, but when those circumstances change, do you feel better? If someone knocked on your door with a check for $5 million during this pandemic, would you feel joy? Not would you know this is a good thing for me, because there's a difference. There's like two halves of your brain. One half of your brain, is scientific. It figures things out. 1 and 1 is 2 in this half of your brain. Someone gives you a check for $5 million in this half of your brain. That's a good thing. But the other half you have no control over. And that's the emotion that you feel, the emotion called joy. So if you came to me when I have been at my worst and said to me, here's that check, I would go, that's great. Oh my gosh, you know what I'm going to do with that? And I would know all the things that I'm going to do with that, but I wouldn't feel joy. Yeah. There's a difference between knowing something is good for you and that basic feeling of joy, which can come from very, very small things that don't have to be that $5 million check.
I think that's better than a Google search. And I think there's, untold number of people who would benefit from hearing what you said in that way. There are lots of people, though, who claim to feel, again, down, sad. Are there things, because this is aimed at kind of a professional audience, business audience, are there strategies that folks who are struggling with mental illness and depression that they apply in their daily lives, or when they have, let's say, an episode that could be applied during heightened levels of anxiety among the greater population? And I know one time you've said something that really, I still remember this too. You said, don't tell me to go for a walk, right? Because that's one thing that people like to say, but that doesn't always work. Are there things that really are helpful that could be also useful for the general population?
Yeah, I mean, that is ultimately a very difficult question to answer. On Isolation Nation, we did 60 shows. Each one was about 45 minutes. We talked to 110 different guests. Most of them were either athletes, former athletes, musicians, actors, kind of like Off the Record was back in the day, because, it's not that you don't want to watch a show with people you don't recognize, but in general, people who are just average people aren't as interesting to watch. So you put people on who have maybe a little fame or recognition and have the ability to tell a story in a pretty good way. So we also put doctors on and psychologists and psychotherapists and social workers and people of all kinds of skills. And I ask that question every day: what can people do to improve their mental outlook as opposed to their mental health? Because I'm not talking about the people with severe depression. I'm not talking about people like me. I'm on medication. You know, I'm treated for my illness. But what can people do who are now battling, as opposed to turning to, you know,
Yeah.
because that's a huge issue. I also spent 2 years in France doing pantomime. Yeah, that was pretty not good.
Yeah, for anyone listening, Michael was pantomiming, unscrewing and chugging back some alcohol.
Right, but this is an epidemic now of self-medicating. You know, but not for the same reason that people self-medicate for depression. People self-medicate for depression, and I think I may have spoken about this a couple of days ago on a blog, that it's the short-term pain that drives us crazy, right? And that when you are in intense pain, you will do whatever is closest and fastest to make you feel better. And this isn't the question you asked, but I have a better answer for this than I have for the other. And you know what? Damn you, I'm going to take this in any direction I want. I'm the guest. I can do this. I'm your mentor. Don't look at me like that. But when we're in pain, we will go for the closest and best way to get rid of the pain, even though we know that bottle or that snort of Coke or whatever other drug we're choosing, that pharmaceutical, which is probably the biggest issue going right now. You know, why do people reach for fentanyl when they're in pain? And the answer is because it gets rid of the pain. And the fact that it may compromise their future is not relevant. The fact that when you drink the next day, you're going to be back further than you were. You're going to be more sick than you were the day before. But it's the immediate relief of pain that people search for. And you need to get treatment in place of that. You need to find a way, like my brother's a kidney doctor. So they don't just give out, you know, licenses to practice, you know, kidney doctoring, nephrology. You got to be pretty damn smart. And here's a smart guy who was addicted to alcohol and to prescription pills. And the answer why is the same reason that many people do it, is that they don't know that they're self-medicating. They just know that they're in pain and that that drink or that pill makes them feel better.
So Michael, let's talk now about sharing. And I do have something that I want to read because I don't want to screw it up. You said something along the lines of, in the past, the stigma goes when people talk about it. The real problem comes from within, when you keep it to yourself. You said, fight for your happiness. If you don't, no one will. And that was, to me, very powerful. Can you say more about that and how you came to realize that that was true?
You know, it's really powerful to put somebody's words back at them, A, to show them that you actually thought about this in advance, but also B, because hearing your own words, as you just did for me, makes me think about those words. And read the last line again. If you don't, no one will. Is that how you phrased it?
Fight for your happiness, because if you don't, no one else will.
Right. And I think I should correct that to say, if you don't, who will? And better still, who can? You know, like this is the kind of thing that you can't just put your happiness, your ultimate mental health and your mental illness in somebody else's hands. They can't do it for you. They can help you along the way, but they can't drive the car. They can't be the key. You have to do it because you don't want to get out of bed and you don't want to go to a doctor and you don't even want to say, hey, I'm suffering from depression. You don't want to go on medication and you don't want to do any of that. Your instinct is you just want to stay in bed. So unless you commit to the fight for your happiness, you are never going to get better and no one can do it for you. It's up to you. People can help you. People can be there for you. But no one can fight for you. You need to do it yourself. And sometimes you need someone like me kicking you in the ass and reminding you that this is not a death sentence. It's a death sentence if you accept it as one. And here's the biggest problem, John, is that you lie in bed and the illness has taken away all your energy and your self-esteem and your belief in yourself and your will. And then it's like the illness says to you, okay, why don't you get out of bed and fight me now? And you're like, you got nothing. And yet you need to fight harder at that point than perhaps for anything that you fought for in your life. Your instinct is stay in bed. And I'm here to tell you that you can't do that. As much as we all have wanted to do that with depression, you can't do that. You need to fight for your happiness, because if you don't, no one will, but more importantly, no one can.
I'm still astounded, even given your answer earlier, how you're able to do this every day and create that discipline, even though you, as you said, you didn't have it before. I think that in itself, without the mental health related theme, anyone watching this should be able to take away from that you can, if you weren't disciplined in a certain area, you can create that for yourself too. Especially important today in COVID-19, when we're creating our own schedules here, especially for students who are working asynchronously and they have to make their own deadlines and complete modules on their own time. If Michael can do it for 5 years every day, so can you. Michael, I want to thank you so much for taking time to be here. You absolutely check that box against that phrase that you should never meet your heroes. I think you should, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I really do hope it isn't the last time we're able to have a conversation.
Hey, a couple of things. Number one, my daughter, who I think arranged for this interview, is sitting right there, and excellent job. Honestly, the best, you did a great job booking this, letting him get through the gate to get to it. Because, it's like, honestly, very thoughtful. You certainly are rewarded when you're the interview subject by someone having thought about the interview in advance. I just think that the only thing I can say is you were showing off when you said asynchronously. I just feel like we're trying to say, oh, look at me, I'm university educated. Well, you know what, mister? Great job, man.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you go to SickNotWeak.com. Go on the YouTube channel too, youtube.com, I think /SickNotWeak. And just play the game that I did years ago, which was find your date of birth and go back into the history and see what Michael talked about on your birthday for one of those years, the last 4 or 5 years. And trust me, from there it can take you anywhere. SickNotWeak.com.
Facebook is probably the best, Facebook and Twitter, but Facebook, we are Sick Not Weak, or just Sick Not Weak. And we post those videos every day. And I see, like, the world will be changed after you said that. I see people using their birth dates to find out what was the daily Landsblog on that day. That is fun for people at parties. That's fun for the whole family.
I agree completely. Everyone, that's the next thing that you should do. Thanks everyone for watching or listening. We'll see you next time.